All right, so now we're ready to start building our app. So the first thing that you're going to need is a VIKTOR account. So head over to VIKTOR.ai and create a free account. When you head over to the VIKTOR website, somewhere up on the right-hand side, you should see something like Start for Free. So click on that button and that'll bring you to a page like this. Fill in the form here, your name, email address, and company if that's relevant for you, and submit the form. And that will allow you to create a free VIKTOR account. Now, I really like the free VIKTOR account because it allows you to build apps for free, basically. So you're able to determine whether or not you like the platform, whether it will be useful for you, without any real commitment. So that's really quite good. So when you've created your VIKTOR account, that's going to drop you into an onboarding flow that looks something like this. So at this point, we have to make a decision. Are we going to develop locally on our machine, or are we going to use a cloud-based development environment? Now, if you're on a Mac, you'll have to use a cloud-based development environment. I am on a Mac, and so that's what I'll be doing today. But I actually like that. I prefer that option personally because my MacBook here has quite a lot going on already, and I don't need to be downloading and setting up anything else on my MacBook if I can avoid it. And so I actually think a cloud-based development environment is the way to go. Now, we're going to use a Github Codespace. And that means you have to have a GitHub account, a free GitHub account. So good chance you probably already have one of those. If you don't, head over to github.com and create a free account. It's very straightforward. So once you've created that account and logged into it, then come back here. And we'll basically just work through this setup wizard. So I'm going to click on I want to use a cloud-based environment. That's fine. Now, how this works is VIKTOR have a template repository. We're going to copy or clone that repository into our GitHub account, right? So we'll create a new repository in our account. That's going to be the basis of our app. We'll give it a name. We'll clone the VIKTOR repo into it, and then we will spin up a Codespace, which is going to be our online development environment based on that repo in our account. Okay, so how does this work? It sounds like a lot of steps. It's actually not too bad. All we're going to do is click on Create New. That's going to take us to my GitHub account and the new repository workflow or page in my account. So I'm going to give this new repository in my GitHub account a name. I'll call it Truss App. This is going to be the name of your app, so whatever, make it whatever you want. It's going to be a private repository, and I'm going to just click on Create Repository. So that's going to take the template repo from the VIKTOR GitHub account and copy it into our account. And there we have it, it's copied over. All right, so I'll head back over to the wizard. So we're going to be bouncing back and forth between the wizard and our GitHub account, our GitHub Codespace here as we work through this process. So I'm going to just click on I have created a repository. Now the next step is to set up a Codespace based on that repository. So these are the instructions to do that. It's relatively straightforward. It's very straightforward. So I'll head back over here to my repository that I've just copied, my Truss app repository, and I'm going to click on this green button, hit the drop down. Now I'm not going to create a Codespace on main. Instead, click on the three buttons here and click on New with Options. All right, so the thing we have to do now is we have essentially a repository in our GitHub account, okay, and we're going to be having a Codespace developed or spun up, if you like, based on that repository. So that's over here. Right. Then we have a VIKTOR account over here, right? And the two need to be linked, okay? So the way we link them is through a set of credentials, essentially a password that just allows essentially our Codespace to be linked into our VIKTOR account. So what I'll do is head back over to the wizard, right? I'll hit next on this guy. This is the password. This thing here, this string is what links our GitHub Codespace to our VIKTOR account, right? So this is the only time you're going to see this. So you want to copy this and paste it somewhere, safe into a notepad or something, put it to one side so that you can get it again in case you need it. And what we need to do is copy it, and we're going to need to paste it somewhere now in a second. So I'm just going to copy that guy there. I'm going to head back over to my Codespace. Now, in order to paste this in, we're going to have to paste it into our Codespace settings. Now, I'm going to click on this. So I'm going to command click on this to open it in a new window, right? So it's opened up over here. So this is my settings. This is where I'm going to paste in that key. But before I do that, before I paste it in, we just leave that window there, come back over here, and I'm going to create the Codespace. Once I've created the Codespace, I can then paste that secret key in to the credentials slot, if you like, for that code space. Right, so create the code space. That'll take a second. Here we are. This is essentially our online development environment now. We'll zoom in a bit here. Again, if you've developed using VS Code, this is going to be fairly familiar to you. So we'll just give it a second to spin up. Okay, so while that's spinning up there, let's just take a look around here. So we have a File Explorer window over on the left here, just like in VS Code. We've got our main editor window, code editor window here, and we have an integrated terminal down here. So all the sort of main elements of a typical development environment. So we're just waiting for a few more commands to pop up down here. Here we go. Okay, so what we can see here when we look down in this terminal here, we have an X here and it says your system is not ready to use with Victor, essentially because we haven't provided our credentials. So this is where we head over here to our Codespace settings, where it says Victor credentials. We'll click on the little pencil. And now we're going to add our credentials, right? So we're going to enter a new value. We're going to paste in the key that we got over from our setup wizard, and we now have to basically select a repository to associate that key with. So you can click the drop down here and find our Truss app repository. All right, and then we can just hit save changes. Okay, so now we have essentially linked our GitHub Codespace with our Victor account by that secret key, with that secret key. So now we can head back over to our Codespace and we'll see we get a pop-up here to say your Codespace secrets have changed. This is good. So we're going to reload and apply. And after a short period of time here, we see your system is ready to use Victor with isolation mode VN. So essentially we're set up. Okay, so now we have an online development environment where we can write our code and it's linked over to our Victor account. So when we want to look at the front end of our app, we can head over to our Victor account and we'll be able to launch it from there and see all of the changes that we've made in our code reflected over in our app that we launch over in our Victor account. Okay, so that's the setup. That's the main part of the setup done. In the next lecture, we will actually initialize our app and get to a point where we can start adding code in our development environment and seeing the changes reflected on the front end in our app. Okay, so see you in the next one. Okay, so in the last lesson, we set up a Codespace, which is where we're going to write all of the code for our app. In this lesson, we are going to create the app using the template code within that Codespace. So now that we have a Codespace set up that we can write all of our code in, the next thing we have to do is create our app. And so what we'll do is we will paste in the following command. So into our integrated terminal, Victor CLI, create app, and then app type is editor. And so you can find this command in the text associated with this lecture. So once we execute this, this is going to populate our working directory with some files, and it's also going to add some code to our app.py file, which is the main file that our app is built from. So we can see here that we've successfully created the app in the current working directory. That's fine. The next step is to install the app by pasting in Victor CLI clean start. So the first command has created the app. Now we want to install the app. Right, so there we have Victor CLI clean start. Hit that. And we'll just let Victor do its thing. All right, so now we have an app installed and running in our local development environment. So we can see here app is ready, which tells us basically that we have an app running. Now, if at any point you basically stop the app running or it crashes, so for example, I'm just going to do Control C here. Now the app is not running anymore. If I want to start it up again, it's just Victor CLI and start. So that's the command that you'll use whenever you want to start your app up again. So you can see now our app is up and running. So that is the end of the setup, right? So we now have an app that is running. It's installed. It's just a base app. It's blank, right? There's nothing in it. It's just a blank app that is installed and now it's running in our development environment. We can now head over to our Victor account and go into our development workspace and basically launch that app, launch the blank app. So let's do that now. Let's head over to our Victor account. Now you can see here at the end of the setup wizard, right? once you finish that setup wizard and keep hitting next and you finish it, it gives you a congratulations message to say everything was set up. Then it will try and launch the app. But it tried to launch the app before we did the steps that we just did in this video, and that's why you get this error. So don't worry too much about that. So if I just head back to my workspaces here, you can see in my account I have 2 workspaces. This guy here is the workspace associated with the version of the app that I've already built that you've seen on the Engineering Skills website, where we'll talk a little bit more about workspaces later on in this project. But for now, I want to focus on this development workspace. This essentially is the workspace that is tied to our development environment, to our code space, right? So any changes we make in the code space, we'll see them reflected in this development workspace here, right? So what I can do is hit open here. And this is our app basically, right? So our app is basically just a blank screen because we haven't done anything yet. We haven't added anything. So that's what we want to do next. We want to basically make some changes some very basic, simple changes over in our workspace and see them reflected over in the app here. So this is when I said previously that you're basically going to be bouncing between 2 different locations. This is it, right? You're going to be bouncing between here, your app, right? And your code space. So any of the changes we make here in the code space, they'll be reflected over in the app over here. Okay, so we're going to, as I say, keep bouncing back and forth between these 2. And in fact, a good thing to do before I move on at all, a good thing to do would be commit the code, right? So essentially, if you're familiar with GitHub, you don't need me to explain this to you. It's basically just the initial commit of your code over to your repo. If you're not familiar with GitHub, essentially committing your code is basically like taking a snapshot of your code and saving a snapshot. And it's a really handy thing to do because it allows you to go back in time. If you mess anything up, you can always step back in time to a previous version of your code. So I'll periodically throughout the project, I'll commit my code. So I'll walk through it once with you now, just so you know the process. And then in future, I'll just say, commit your code. Okay, I'm just going to stop the app by hitting Control C. Basically, I need to take all of the code in this project and add it to what's called a staging area, right? So this is like super quick overview of Git. So if I do git status now, right, we see these are all of the files, right, that have changes in them. They're either new files that Git is not aware of, that our tracking system is not aware of, or they are files that have changes in them that our tracking system has not saved yet. Let's put it that way. So these are red, right, which means there's untracked changes in those files. So I need to add all of those to a staging area. So we'll just say git add, and then that full stop is short for all. So git add all. So now if I do git status, we'll see they're all green, right? So they're staged, they're ready to be committed, right? So now I want to commit, which just means save, right? So git commit. We can add a message, so -m, and then we'll just say here, it can be any message you like. So this is our initial commit. Close the comment and hit enter. So now we've committed the code. Okay, so essentially the snapshot is saved. Now we want to push that snapshot up to GitHub so we can always have access to it. So in order to do that, it's going to be git push origin main. Okay, excellent. And that process, that sort of 3 commands, git add all, git commit and add a message, and then git push origin main, those 3 commands are, you'd be saying them in your sleep by the time you finish this project, because that's basically you taking snapshots and saving snapshots of your code as you move through the project. And it's just a good thing to do on any development project. All right, so we want to start our app up again. So remember, Victor CLI start. And now our app is started. Okay, so let's just have a quick look inside this app.py file. So this had some code sort of dumped into it when we installed the app. I want to just talk about what this is, these 2 classes here. So every Victor app basically is built around a single file, an app.py file. And you can have many additional files, and we'll have various different additional Python files that we'll write code in, but we'll always pull the code from those additional files into this file. Now, you don't have to split your code up into different files. It's completely up to you. The bigger your app gets, the more you're kind of going to want to split your code up to be able to manage it more easily. But it all comes back to this. This is the root. This file here, app.py, is the root of your entire application. Okay, it has 2 classes. Okay, it's very straightforward. There's what's called the parameterization class and then the controller class. Now, we're going to sort of talk more about these as the project goes on, but broadly speaking, the parameterization class is where we put all of the code that basically controls how someone inputs data into our app. So if we have, like, if we want a box in our app, in our actual app that the user interacts with, where someone can put a value in, that would be controlled from the parameterization class. Everything that gets passed in through that parameterization class gets essentially saved, and then we will have access to those inputs that the user inputted in through that parameterization class. Okay, the second class in here is the controller class. This is where all the calculations happen. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is add some code into our parameterization class so that we can see the effect of it over on the front end. Now, what I'd like to do is add some tabs and some text to our app that are going to provide some indication to the user about what they need to do inside of our app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import into app.py some basic building blocks, and that's one of the really powerful things about using Viktor. It comes with lots of these different building blocks built in. So if you've ever built software from the ground up, and you've done whether it's web development or any kind of software development, you know that it's building all of the little things that you need to have in an app for someone to interact with is really time intensive, right? A huge amount of work goes into it. What's good about Viktor is it's all basically pre-built. They're like building blocks that you'll bring in and plug into your app, and it massively saves on time when it comes to building out an app. So I'm going to import some building blocks. The first one's going to be a tab, then I'm going to bring in a text, and then a section. Those are 3 different building blocks, and you'll see how they get used. At the start, this is all going to feel very abstract, right? You know, I'm talking about bringing in text and sections and tabs. It doesn't really make much sense, but when you see it, when you see me use it, it'll start to make sense, right? So I'm going to, let me see, from, where am I bringing it in from? Viktor.parameterization, I'm going to import, we've already imported this guy by default, won't worry too much about that. But from the same place, I also want to import tab, text, and section. So these are now building blocks I can use within my app. And then down in here, we don't need that pass anymore. Down in here, what I'll do is I will say I want a tab, and that tab is going to say welcome. Let me see. And then I want a handle to that. So I'm just going to call it tab 1. Okay, so what is that? That's basically me saying I'm adding a tab to my app, and the tab will have welcome in it. Let's see what that looks like, actually, just the most basic of things. In fact, let's add one more thing. Inside of tab 1, right? So tab 1 dot text 1, right? So this text 1 is just a name I'm giving it. I'm going to set that equal to a text. Okay, so that text there is that text up there, all right, a text, and I'm going to just put in for now hello world, right, the classic. So what have I done? I have added a tab, given it the text welcome. This is just me giving it a handle so that I can access it in the future, and that future is basically on the next line because I'm accessing tab 1, and then I'm essentially bolting onto that tab a block of text, and I'm giving that text the variable name text1. Right, so this is how you build up basically in these sort of hierarchies. A text lives under a tab, and that's being equal to the text building block, and the text itself is going to be hello world. Okay, so let's just see what that does. So let me see, that's all saved. The app is running, so let's head over to our editor, and if I refresh the page here, there we have it, right? So we've added a tab, that's a tab, welcome, and there's hello world. So maybe a bit of a light bulb went off there for you, hopefully, but you can kind of see this is going to be the way we build from here on, right? So we're going to be basically adding bits and pieces into our code, and then coming over here and seeing them reflected straight away. All right, let's jump back over here. So we've added a tab, we've added some text now. So let's add in a comment here just to say that was tab 1. I'm basically just going to repeat that again and again. Now the next one is going to be our data input tab. For that, I'm going to add in a section. So this next tab is going to have multiple different sections, right? The first section is going to be one for defining the analysis constants. Makes sense. And that's going to have some simple text for now. It's just going to be hello world. So let me just drop that in next. Okay, so tab 2 is call it data input, and we've added now a section, right, to that tab, and then there's this idea of the hierarchy coming in again, right? So we've got tab 2, then we've got section 1, and then within section 1 we're adding a text, and I'm just calling that info, and I'm setting it equal to hello world. So let's see, what is the what's the red here for? Inconsistent use of tabs and spaces. I think there was just something wrong with the spacing or the indenting there, but basically reversing the indent and indenting again got rid of it. Let me see if that solved the problem. I think that was probably something to do with me copying over from my reference code here. So let's see if that fixed the issue. Refresh our app again. And there we have it, okay? So now we have a new tab, data input. This is our section, define analysis constants. We can collapse it and uncollapse it. And then within that, we have hello world. So hopefully you can kind of get to see at this very basic level what we're doing here. We're just adding structure to our app. So let's crack on there. Let's get some more stuff in here. It's basically rinsing and repeating the same. So what I'll do is drop in the remaining code I want to drop in. We have that same funny issue there. So I'm going to just redo the indent. So all of this code, by the way, you can just copy over from the text lesson associated with this video. It's all over there. So you don't have to type all this out yourself. So let's save that. Head back over to our app and see what we have. All right. So we have a welcome tab, a data input tab, which has the following sections. We have define analysis constants, define structure geometry, define restraints, and define applied load. So obviously that just contains hello world text for now. We're going to add all the various different bits and pieces we need to add over the coming lectures. And then we have another tab here for results export. All right. So that's basically what I wanted to do here, just to make that link between the development environment here and our app over on our front end. And I'm basically showing you that changes you make here, we can quickly see them over on the app on the front end via the VIKTOR development workspace. Okay, so now with that basic understanding of our Codespace and our VIKTOR development workspace and the link between the two, we're going to pause it there. And in the next lecture, we're going to come back and think and talk a little bit more about how we're going to structure this app and the various different files that we're going to break our code up between. So take a break and I'll see you in the next one. So in this lesson, I want to talk about how we are going to break up the code in our app across a number of different files. So as you know, this tutorial, this build that we're doing now is based on a previous tutorial where we built a Truss analysis app using OpenSees in a Jupyter notebook. So we're basically taking the code from that notebook and dispersing it across a number of different Python files. This is again optional. You don't have to do this. You could put all of your code in one file, but I think it makes more sense to break it up. So how are we going to do this? I'm going to have a number of different files here, right? We're going to have one that is going to hold all of our OpenSees code, all of our structural analysis code. We'll call that analysis.py. In fact, let's just actually create these files as we talk down through them. So I want to create a new Python file over here on the left. So I'm just going to right click, hit new file, and this one is going to be called analysis.py. All right. So as I said, that's going to hold all of our analysis code. We will add in some very basic function definitions at this stage and then come back later and actually fill in the function bodies. So since this is going to hold all of our OpenSees code, all of our analysis, we're going to have to import OpenSees. First of all, that's going to be the first thing that we need to do. So I will start by importing OpenSeesPy.OpenSees as OPS. Now, when we do that, we see an issue, first of all. Okay, now this warning here is because we haven't installed OpenSees yet into our project. Our Codespace here doesn't know anything about OpenSees, so it's seeing us here trying to import OpenSees, and it's sort of saying back to us here, hang on, what's OpenSees? You haven't got anything called OpenSees. So we've got to install that next. Now you could do this as part of the initialization process that we went through in the previous video. You could, at that point, you could provide all of the dependencies that your project is going to need, and then in the installation process, VIKTOR would basically pull all those packages in for you. And that's fine. You can do that. You can also do it at this stage. And the reason I'm showing you at this stage how to do it is because it's very likely if you're building something, you're not going to know all the dependencies that you're going to need at the very start of the project. And so it's very likely that you're going to be at some point in your project needing to add in a new dependency. And this is basically what you would do. So what I'll do here is I will stop our app from running. I'll then do pip install, then in my terminal, pip install OpenSeesPy, and that's basically installing OpenSeesPy into my development environment. So the next thing we need to do is add that to our requirements text file. So if I open up our requirements text file, we can see that the only thing that we have in here is the Victor version 14.11. Again, the version numbers of Victor and of OpenSees might be different for you depending on when you're following this. Don't worry too much about that. So I need to add OpenSees as one of my requirements here into my txt file. So very easy. All I'm going to do is type in OpenSeesPy, and I'm going to let that equal to whatever version that I just installed. Now, for me, when I'm recording this, it's 3.6.0.2. I think the last time I did this, it was 3.5. So OpenSeesPy has obviously been updated since I did this last. That's okay. So now we've told our app what the dependency is on the version, so we can just save that, and we should be able to start our app again. And well, you can see, well, let me see, start our app again, and we shouldn't have any problems. So remember, Victor CLI start. All right, we're up and running, and the error is gone, or the warning is gone. So now our app knows about OpenSees. It knows that that's a dependency, and we can use OpenSees quite happily. So in this analysis.py file, we're only going to have one function, and it's going to be to analyze the structure. So let's define a function called analyze structure. Now, that function is going to take Young's modulus, a cross-sectional area. It will take the nodes, their positions. It will take the member definitions. All of this is going to be information we've obviously got to feed in. It's going to take information on the restraints, if I can spell, and it's going to take information on the applied forces. So it's going to take all of that information. It's going to do a whole series of calculations, which we will add in later. In fact, let's just say fill in function body later. And then it's going to return something. For now, we won't return anything. We'll essentially just have the return statement so that we don't get an error. So that's basically what we're going to do for now. We'll just create the Python file, define the function that will live in that file, and come back and fill in the function later. So that's the first file. The next one that I want to do is our visualizations file. So we'll have a separate Python file called visualization.py, and in here we'll place all of the code needed to do the plotting for our app. So we're going to be using matplotlib. You could use plotly if you wanted, but I sort of am more comfortable with matplotlib, so we'll stick with that. So we're going to import matplotlib.pyplot as PLT. We don't have to install that additionally, and that already gets installed by default when our app is installed, so there's no additional installs to do. Now we're also going to need later on string IO, so we'll just do from the IO library import string IO. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, what that's doing for us. Okay, so they're the imports we need. In terms of functions, the way I'm going to do this is I'll have one function that takes information about the structure and just plots the structure, and then another function that plots the response of the structure. Now, in the response, we're going to have it'll be two plots, two subplots. One of them will be plotting the axial force diagram, whether a force is compression or tension, and then the other one is going to be the deflected shape diagram. So let's just define plot structure. Naturally enough, it's going to need to know about the nodal positions and the member definitions. So nodes and members gets passed in, and we'll fill in the function body later, and we'll just return. So that's our first function definition. Then we want to plot the structural response. So let's just define a function called plot response. Naturally, it takes nodes and members again, but it also takes the nodal displacements, the member forces, and then a factor that we're going to apply to our displacements so that we can amplify the deflected shape so we can see it more clearly. All right, so now in terms of plotting the response, that's going to be the parent function that gets called. I'm going to have plot response call to other functions that will actually do the plotting or handle the plotting code. So they're going to be two sub functions. So one's going to be called subplot forces, and then the other one is going to be called subplot deflection. All right, so that is our visualization Python file all set up, ready to be filled in. The next file I'll set up is data.io.py, and this is going to be a file that's going to hold a series of functions that are going to be like utility functions that are going to handle data import and data export. So when a user provides information and we need to convert that information to a format that our analysis code is expecting, we'll call a function from that utility library of IO functions, and they're all going to be stored in this file, which we will call data.io.py. All right, so this file is going to need NumPy, it's going to need IO, and it's going to need OS. We'll see what those are for as we move forward. Now, our first function is going to be for processing our geometry file. So we're going to allow our users to upload a CSV file, and we've got to do something with the information in that CSV file. We've got to convert it to a format that our analysis code is expecting or can work with, and all of that processing is going to be handled inside of this file. Then we're going to do the same thing with our restraint information. The user is just going to be able to interact with a simple table and select the restraints and the nodes that those restraints apply to. We then have to process that information, and that happens inside of compute restraint array. Then we want the same thing for forces, process the force information provided by the user inside of compute force array. We want a function that will handle the exporting of results, and so our code will generate all these results. We want to export them, and that will be done inside of export results. And then we want another function that is going to allow the user to download a demo geometry file, and that's going to be export demo. So you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Anytime I have a dedicated thing, a dedicated function that my app needs to perform, whether it is the fundamental one of doing the structural analysis, or whether it's a sort of a supporting or supplementary function like processing data or whatever the case may be, I'm creating a standalone function that I can call that will execute that will do that task. And then I'm sort of breaking those different functions up into Python files that kind of make sense. So all the functions that deal with visualization, they can live in one file. All the functions that, like here, that deal with processing data that's coming into or going out of our app, all those functions live in the data.io file. What this does is it makes my code much easier to maintain and manage going forward, because I have a clearer mental picture of where everything, all of the code in my app lives. It all follows a kind of not a hierarchy as such, but it makes sense where that code is, rather than just having one massive file with all of the functions listed in there. All right then, so the only other file that we're going to need is going to be a text file. Well, no, it's a Python file, but it's going to store text. So again, this is another thing that's going to make your life easier. If you collect all of the text that will be used, like this could be text for explaining a data input or explaining this to the user or that to the user, collect all of that text into a single file. Again, it makes it easy to go back and edit the text because it's not distributed all throughout your app code. All of the text lives in a single text file. And it means you can go and find it really easily if you want to make changes. Okay, so that's what I'll do next, right? So this one's going to be called text.py. All right, and in here I'm just going to store a series of strings. That's it, right? So for example, I'm going to have some welcome text in my app. So there's no imports or anything. We'll just say welcome text is equal to, we will have a multi-line comment, and then let me see. So I'm just going to put in any text here. Really, you'd put in whatever text is relevant for your particular app, right? So I'm just going to put in here. This is a multi-line comment, and we'll use this somewhere in our app. And again, this is really just for demonstration here, right? But these text blocks will support Markdown, and so we can have. So let me see. I can have a Markdown header. So this is a H2 header indicated by the double hash signs here. So let me just get rid of that. Here we go. Markdown headers can also be used. We can also use Markdown math formatting, like so. Okay, so this is obviously just a demonstration block of text, right? It's not relevant for our specific app, but you would put all of the relevant text for your app in a file like this, assign it a variable name, and then you can plug that text in elsewhere around your app, and we'll see how you can do that. All right, so that's okay for now. We'll leave that as it is. So our app is ready. We won't see any changes on the front end because we haven't done anything inside of app.py here. So this is all unchanged. But what we do need to do in here inside of our main file is import everything from all of the files that we've just created. So that's the last thing we want to do here. So we're going to bring in our utility functions and text blocks, or rather give ourselves the ability to access those from inside of app.py. So this is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to, from each of my files, import everything. So we're saying from analysis, which is referring to that analysis.py file, import star, just means import everything. And so that makes it so as if I have written that function inside of this file here. I can just call the function directly. And that's the last thing we have to do. So in this one, we've established all of the different Python files we're going to need. We've also established all of the different helper functions that we're going to need. And then in the sort of oncoming lectures, in the upcoming lectures, we'll be able to now fill in those functions bit by bit. Okay, so let's leave it there for now, and I'll see you in the next one.